This is a GRDC podcast.
Waterlogging is a complex process, but there is a solution, and land shaping is one of those that we're looking at today. Hello, I'm Deborah Bishop and welcome to our podcast. We're also looking at new technology, heavy machinery, legalities and the latest know-how both locally and nationally and also internationally that they tell us could revolutionise excess water management in your farming system. Now, here to talk to us about that today, we're joined by Quenten Knight, who is a GRDC Western panel member. Thanks a lot for coming along today, Quenten. And also we're joined by Jeremy Whyte, who is a grower here in Esperance. Jeremy, thank you for joining us too. Can you kick us off by just telling us what this region is about and what your waterlogging problems have been over the last few years?
Yeah, so today we're here at Warrakirri Cropping's Lobethal property east of Esperance. We're located pretty closely to the coastline, so a high rainfall zone in and around that 600 millimetres annual average rainfall, which subsequently incurs waterlogging issues and ponding events that leads to standing water and which requires surface drainage to alleviate that issue.
In this region, what are the traditional soil constraints that you would be up against?
I guess compaction, and that's heavily enhanced by the large rainfall events that can occur through a growing season, and then lack of aeration through the soil. Okay.
Now, you're part of a project with GRDC in waterlogging. How did you get into it, and where is it taking you?
I think just from the fact that it's a newly explored area around landforming or shaping. And probably a bit more of a detailed approach to subsurface drainage, I guess. So as early adopters as other people are in other techniques of drainage, it's been a good opportunity to communicate that outwards.
So can you talk us through the landforming practices that you're undertaking here as being guided through this GRDC project?
Yeah, so currently we've implemented through the data that's been captured over time from historical yield data to LiDAR elevation data capture, and then that's been transferred into landforming through the use of carry grader, cutting out high areas, filling into low areas and releasing these ponding areas that lead to waterlogging. And then subsequently, as behind us, we have a clay spreader that's utilising some of the clay that we've managed to stockpile through the implementation of the larger surface drains that we've put into place. It's been a great opportunity to probably utilise some of that valuable resource that we've extracted and then in turn fix up some non-wetting issues that we have as well in this paddock in particular.
Now, Quenten, it's a 5-year project. Just can you take us through what the project is about, what you're trying to get to the bottom of, and the outcomes that you're going to hopefully aim to achieve?
Yeah, so it's a 5-year project. This is year one. So year one, we're sort of more about collecting data and pulling together lots of different information and probably case studies. But essentially, it's about surface water management across Australia. Because in the high rainfall zones, there's probably more cropping starting to happen in those zones, and particularly in WA with the live sheep export thing, and people moving away from sheep. There's probably more high rainfall country that's going to come into cropping, and as that comes into cropping, waterlogging is going to be a major risk for some of those guys. So if we can provide good information about how to plan and implement surface drainage, that will ensure that those growers are probably de-risking their cropping enterprise with regard to waterlogging risk.
Now, that opening statement that land shaping has the potential to revolutionise some of the approaches we have to managing excess water on property. How close might we be to actually seeing that occur?
Oh, I think we'd be very close to seeing that occur. We've seen some examples on this farm east of Esperance last year where landforming was sort of undertaken on a small scale. And whilst it wasn't a particularly wet year last year, there are some really good signs that the process is working. But landforming is not the complete solution. Like, landforming is part of a broader suite of tools that you could use to address the waterlogging problem. So that's what we're sort of seeing on this particular farm, that landforming is one of the options, but then farming direction is another option. So we're working with nature to get the water to flow in the direction that it was naturally flowing anyway. And then we're also using things like deep ripping as well to put some aeration back into the soil and remove some historical soil compaction. So it's a whole range of different tools that we'll be using. And equally there'll be some other things that come in, like tile drainage, for example. There's growers in this region and across Australia that are adopting that. And I think one of the big drivers for landforming and probably the attention around waterlogging in the high rainfall zone is that the land has become very expensive as well. So people need to do what they can to make it as productive as what they possibly can to get the returns necessary to justify such high cost land.
But some of this approach can also be costly itself, can't it? So that investment for growers up front, is that part of the project's focus too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many different ways to tackle waterlogging. So I think one of the most important things is to do some analysis to work out how big the problem is and how much that problem is costing an individual farmer. But then equally, when you've got the data can help guide you into which strategy you might implement. So for some growers it might be as simple as changing farming direction. For others it might be changing farming direction and implementing some surface drainage. And for others it'll be a whole combination of lots of different things to address the problem.
So some of the data that you were showing us earlier was from areas of your farm you've lost completely to water. You're now looking at landforming, and that could return between 500 kilograms to a tonne per hectare uplift in yield across the farm. That means a revenue increase, around $300 per hectare dollars per hectare in the season when waterlogging occurs. Is that the reality you're looking at here?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it's probably the assessed economical sort of loss that's been incurred from years of waterlogging events, but also too, I think it's a sustainable approach as well, because the inputs are still being applied, and we're still going out there and trying to produce off this area, but at times late in the season we are losing those areas to waterlogging and so on. And so I think the payback's real, and at what cost? I guess we're seeing anywhere up to 2-3 times the yield out of these waterlogged areas in the higher production zones in our paddocks. So that's the real, that's the test. We know what we can produce when it's not waterlogged. So the better soil types in those lower lying areas, with the alleviation of water, should be able to produce as well as the higher production zones.
Do you have a time limit? I mean, have you set a site, your site's on a particular time limit as to when that investment's going to start delivering?
I think it's delivered from the first season that we've implemented. Some key drains. They've picked up some low areas. The landforming process, I think, is going to be a process of prioritisation. I think it's quite a laboursome process, and operationally it's pretty impactful on the team. I think over the 2 seasons that we've been implementing this, I think we've probably learnt to look at it and assess the higher level of priorities in a paddock, and the quicker we can roll it out across our total hectares under operation, the better then that's going to be for us. And then once we've completed a broad-ranging program, then we can come back and refine that back upon what we've already done.
So land shaping, we're pretty familiar with it, but there would, I would imagine, be some certain environmental as well as legal regulatory approaches and things that growers need to be aware of.
Yeah, I guess the land forming bit, not so much, but it's more just about broadly surface water management, and it's fresh water that we've got to state, it's not saline water.
Yep.
But I think it's having an understanding of the natural flow of that water, where it's entering your property and where it's exiting your property, and with most of these sorts of things you should go through the appropriate channels to make sure that you've got all the legal requirements taken care of. And you should be in pretty close communication with all of your immediate neighbours and perhaps even the broader catchment.
So we've had a bit of activity here behind us with some clay spreading. Now, is that one of the unexpected bonuses that has actually been a surprise advantage to this process of land shaping? Can you take us through that, Quenten?
Yeah, sure. So part of this land shaping, forming process is it's a little bit of cut and fill. So when we were digging these drains, we're obviously cutting material, and as it turned out, some of that material as we went deeper was high quality clay. So that seemed a real waste to use that as fill material to fill the bottom of quite deep holes. So as these drains were starting to get cut, Jeremy and the team had a pretty good idea to stockpile that material, because in this environment we also have quite extensive non-wetting soil, and part of the process of fixing up non-wetting is to clay spread. So through cutting these drains last summer, there was probably between 150,000 to 200,000 tonne of high quality clay that was stockpiled, and now that's getting used post the landforming as one of the final passes to put clay over the top of that soil. And the idea is to raise, once that's incorporated in the soil profile, to get the soil's clay content up to around 5% clay. And that should have a very long-term effect of addressing the non-wetting problem with these soils.
And there's liming?
So we're pretty fortunate in the Esperance region where a lot of our clay is alkaline, and as a result of that, as we're spreading, so this spreader that's operating behind us is putting out that clay at around 300 tonnes to the hectare. So at that rate, and given that it's alkaline material, it's having a liming effect. And the other thing that we're quite fortunate about in this area is our clay is generally quite rich in potassium. So we're getting a liming and a potassium effect, as well as fixing the non-wetting. So we're getting some really nice added bonuses.
So how, for a grower, I mean, was that a pretty great discovery, I suppose? It's a bit of an unexpected discovery for you?
I think we always had an understanding. I think, as Quenten said, I think it was one of the things is distance to fill targets as well. We're quite stretched, and that's probably where a lot of the cost is incurred, is travel time without actually working. So stockpiling became a good opportunity there. Probably our expectations of the carry grader to build the drain in total and its entirety was probably a bit ambitious. We found that probably the durability of the machine at depths of up to 3.5 metres in the drain was pretty unsustainable and was causing some significant breakdowns and downtime issues. So we did engage a contractor with a couple of dozers. So once they started operating as well, that incurred more stockpiling. But I think it's a great thing. It helps finish it off, and it helps also stabilise some of the landformed areas where they're vulnerable and quite light on top. It helps to settle that down.
So, Quenten, if growers are showing some interest in land shaping, landforming, I understand data collection is really probably the starting point. Is that what you'd suggest?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, because the data, and growers have got some really good ways of collecting data now, like on their own machines. A lot of them that have got RTK GPS, they'll be collecting highly accurate elevation data. In this particular case here, we started off in 2013 with RTK data, but then we've progressed in 2024 to a LiDAR data, which is giving us accuracy to about 1 centimetre, and also capturing all the arable and non-arable land on the farm. So we've got a really good understanding of where the water's ponding and where it wants to enter the farm and exit the farm. So yeah, data's integral, and once you've got the elevation data, you can also combine that with yield data over the years. So you'll have some wet years and some dry years, and it really gives you an understanding of how big the problem is, where the problem's localised, and again how you might prioritise those areas which you're going to drain. But I guess fundamentally it gives you an understanding of how much money that the waterlogging problem is costing you.
So if growers are keen to hop onto this project, is there still an opportunity for those to do so, and how might they do that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, part of this project, I guess, at the moment is identifying leading growers that are probably early adopters of some of this technology, and hopefully through Jeremy here, that they're early adopters, particularly with the landforming, because landforming in WA is quite a new concept. Yeah. It's certainly been used on the east coast, probably in the cotton industry and irrigation, but certainly in WA broadacre, not so much. So I think it's probably just introducing growers to a new way of doing things. So I think hopefully through this we can get people thinking about what the opportunities might be, and some growers might think, well, that's going to be part of my long-term drainage strategy, as well as all the tools that they might have already been using.
So, Jeremy, any final words of advice to growers who might consider going your direction?
I think it's just there's not one size fits all approach, and I think it's a matter of starting, and things will change as you go, and there's plenty of different practices that have been implemented, and I'm sure along the way as well we will at times possibly deviate, and tiling and other things as well. But for now, it's about staying the course on this, and I'm sure when we get the next high rainfall season come up, that it'll play true to be be worth the while.
We've been listening to Quenten Knight, a GRDC Western panel member, and also Jeremy Whyte, a grower here in Esperance. If you would like more information about waterlogging processes and perhaps a project that GRDC is now engaged in, have a look at the GRDC website for more information. I'm Deborah Bishop, and thanks again.